I don't think that I can talk too much about clearing our reactivity. I talk about it a lot all through the day with my clients, and I was reflecting that it can never be said enough, because if we're reactive to situations and people, we're not in the present, and we're coming out of our conditioning, and then we can't be creative, we can't be in harmonious relationships, we can't enjoy our lives as much, because I'm sure it is widely known. I'm not sure how widely known actually, but I think more and more people are aware how much of our life we're living from our conditioning. Those early years, those first 7 years of childhood development are so key, and it's a time where we're in that state of receptivity, in a very different brain state, and we're receptive to everything, and we're learning. And if we think of the amount we learn in those 7 years, it is phenomenal. Languages, in some cases, how to walk, how to read, to write, to do all the things a human needs to do. And we learn behaviours, and we learn to adapt, and we learn certain behaviours are acceptable. We learn these because we need to survive. We need to survive in the world of adults, the people looking after us. So those first 7 years, massive amount of conditioning, and the subconscious mind is completely programmed and very effectively to manage in the world, to go out into the world and be able to communicate and survive and get living handled, basically. But it's not always that our conditioning makes us thrive, and therefore whatever's going on in our life, whatever is happening in front of us now, and if we have patterns that are positive and powerful or negative and destructive and disappointing, they're all going to be coming from our conditioning. And therefore investigating, as I said last week, is very key. But one of the key ways to recognise that things are coming out of the past is when we're reactive. And one of the key places of growth is in relationship. And we can't not be in relationship. We're all here together, and we can't not be in relationship. It's have to be completely, occasionally people do completely hermit themselves, but essentially we're always in relationship with one another, and therefore there's always the opportunity for us to grow and evolve and see where our wounding is, and where the places are that we're not connected to who we truly are, because reactivity is always an arrow to a wound in us, something to do with the past. So if we react to somebody because we don't feel that they have heard what we said, we don't feel that they're doing what we want, we don't feel understood, we feel disconnected from them, any of these things, our reactivity to it shows the separation in us from our wholeness. And this doesn't mean, as I always say, that we don't want to work in relationships together to work out how best to do them and how we want to organise ourselves, whether that's in business relationships or love relationships or families or sports teams. Of course, we need to knock about the rules and things that are needed for the whole to function. But really and truly, when people are whole and feel good in themselves and their self-esteem is high, then it's very easy to make rules up and make up, ideas of how we do things. However, so often people aren't whole. They've come out of their childhood, they're conditioned, they are functioning in the world, but they have lost who they truly are due to the layers and layers of beliefs, value systems, ideals, ideas, conditions that are put into them through their experiences in those early years and through society and school and all of the things that go on. And so they come into the world, or we come into the world, not whole, not in touch with our essence, more in touch with the whole heap of identifications to do with our mind and our personality and who we think we need to be to survive in this journey. And we've lost touch with our essence and our oneness, and that there's no separation from us all, and that we're all love, and that we can all actually love each other. Now, of course, relationship shows this up, because when we first, if we're talking about a romantic relationship or even friendship and business relationships, actually all relationships often have an early phase of excitement and the honeymoon phase where everything is flowing. And that can happen because for instance, if we're looking at business, if people go and have an interview with somebody, they can be completely connected, completely present, completely in a dialogue in a flow, and utterly present. And of course, people can take jobs and people can be employed based on that, which is presence. And then once they get into the actual rough and tumble of the actual day by day, people then slip into their adaptations, their reactions, their past. And this can happen in all relationships, that we will often choose people to have relationships with, friendships, lover relationships, and colleagues and people who we work with. We'll choose them, 90% of it can be unconscious, because most people are unconscious. They are operating from a whole set of programs and the paradigm, the whole paradigm, as I said. Now, this doesn't mean things don't always work out, because often the programs running or the patterns that people are in mirror each other, and it kind of works together, and there may be some reactivities and things that go on, but they can actually work okay. And this can be in all relationships. It isn't like every relationship isn't going to work out for people, but for true presence and true growth and true wholeness, when we see the reactivities that go on, then we can notice that again, we're not present. So again, it can happen in a love relationship, that generally people get together and there's this early phase, the honeymoon phase, the romantic phase, whatever we want to describe it as, where there is absolute presence, absolute ease in the relationship. Each person is very, very open, and there isn't the past coming in. There aren't the patterns coming in. There aren't the reactivities coming in. There aren't all of the conditioning necessarily showing. There is just two people meeting each other in their true essence. But inevitably what happens is people move away from that consciousness and that place of their essence, and instead what starts to happen is, and particularly it's quite common that we will have unconsciously gone towards people who hold parts of our disowned self, aspects of us that we've hidden away because they weren't deemed acceptable, whether it's actual things like being an artist or a sports person, or aspects of ourselves where we we're told to be shushed and quiet, and so we meet somebody who's all lively, and at first that can be wonderful because there's a lost part of ourselves in the mirror of the other person. But then what can happen is it can start to irritate, because any part of ourselves we hide away to survive in our family we'll deem unacceptable, and even though we might get drawn to it, because when we're drawn to people in relationship, whether, as I say, it's friendship or love or business or anything, we will be drawn to these people unconsciously, and they will hold aspects for us to become more whole, because we all want to be whole. And when we meet people, there will be a part of us going, this time I'm going to get my needs met, this time I'm going to be understood, this time I have the opportunity to be my whole self. And of course there is that opportunity. There is that opportunity if you understand this work and understand reactivity and understand the pointers to where we're not whole or we've hidden parts away. So we'll often get drawn unconsciously to people holding hidden aspects of us or lost parts of us, or we'll get drawn to people with the same wounding but different adaptation. As I said, like, we've been told to shush in our family, so we've gone quiet, but we'll get drawn to somebody who may also have been told to shush in their family and they've adapted by being noisy. So we will then, a merry dance of a power struggle can begin, and that can happen again, as I say, in all relationships. It's not just intimacy. Intimacy is often, it's a bigger, more obvious. As I often say, relationship is a mirror. It's a mirror for us to see ourselves reflected back in the mirror of other people, and intimacy is such a magnifying glass for it. But really and truly, if we are mindful that really everything is to do with us, and that can be a difficult thing to go into all situations, even if we've got a difficult colleague, or there's something going on with our partner or our child or a friend, and we don't like what's going on, and we think if they changed it would be better. In all those situations we have to first look at us. And again, I often say this, when one finger points at the person going, if you changed it would all be better, we must first look at these three that point back at us, because ultimately it's an opportunity. If we feel upset, if we feel angry, or we feel misunderstood, or we feel not heard, or we feel anything and we're reacting, then the first bit of work is to press that pause button and go, this is something to do with me. This is a situation where I may not be hearing what the person's saying. I may not actually properly have heard. I've heard my own thing. And if we're reacting, we can't be in the present. We can be up to 90% in the past, and we will be projecting our past situations, our past relationships onto the person in front of us. So reactivity is such a big one to look at, that reaction that rises in the body when we feel upset, when we feel cross, when we feel hurt. We must immediately know that there's something to do with us, rather than going, you've got to change, you've done this. Now, as I always say too, that doesn't mean that we don't, in relating very openly and consciously with people, work out that people might need to, we might need like people to do things differently, of course, and that's going to be in any relationship. As I said, we need to knock about the rules that are needed to get the whole to function well. But the number one thing is, if every single person knew that the most important thing is to look at themselves, that the relationships we have with others are completely dependent on how good our relationship is with ourselves. And if we're reactive to another, or we judge another, or we project onto another, we have in effect cut off love to that person. And that can be the person in the street, that can be the person who's serving our food if we're in a restaurant or a cafe. It can be our friend because they haven't done something the way we like. It can be our colleagues, it can be our partner, it can be our children, it can be our parents. It's everything. If we don't like what's going on and we go, it's them, it's them, it's them, absolutely the first thing we need to do is recognise that we are cutting off love to them. And ultimately what we're doing, the moment we cut off love to another, actually we're cutting off love to ourselves. And what needs investigating is the pain that the reactivity points to. There is an arrow pointing for some inner work. Now, all of this is exacting work, and I was talking with clients today and saying this work that I teach and I work with can be very hard work, because it is very much our responsibility, and people can balk at it and push back at it because we want other people to change, and we go, well, surely that they need to change. Well, I'm not saying people don't, as I've said before, we don't want to chat about maybe doing things differently in different relationships. But if we're coming from reactivity, that is the first place, and it never goes well. If somebody's reactive and they tell somebody what they want differently or done differently with reactivity, all that happens is a whole fight begins. And once people are critical, then the other person's defensive, and then there can be a big withdrawal and nothing happens, and the thing goes round in a cycle, and it doesn't work. So I absolutely promise you that if you, even from now on, just go, okay, if I'm reactive at all, if I'm reactive to anything, it's something to do with me first. And to press pause on it and think, what's been touched in me when I feel affronted because that person's done something, or I feel hurt or disappointed or upset. What is it in me? And is there somewhere where you can remember where it first happened, where you first felt that perhaps you weren't important, or you weren't heard, or your needs weren't getting met? Because ultimately that's the inner work, is to start to heal that wound. And we do that by first noticing it, and then recognizing that ultimately it's as simple as clearing the feeling from our body, whether we do that with breath work, whether we cry or shout or write it out. Often it's good to write it out and burn it, safely burn it, I always say. We need to get that feeling out of our body, and that's the first thing, because we can't think straight when we've got that feeling, because we will be likely to be projecting out of the past. Will be projecting out of the past. So the first thing is to get rid of the feeling and not follow the narrative, and the narrative will be they did, she did, he did, and that needs to stop. And instead we need to do something like I am where I am, it's okay, or completely distract, go and listen to something else, watch something else, to get away from the drama that you're in, because otherwise you create a psychological drama. You have the feeling, and you have the pain of feeling in the body, and then you have the narrative that accompanies it, and then you just get stuck in this cycle. So if you can, you press pause on it, get the feeling out, and just stay where you are. I am where I am, it's okay. Breathe. But if you can't stop your head, then it's better to listen to something, do something else. I mean, ideally we learn to train the brain, but if you can't quite do it, you're better to distract, change the state a bit, so that you don't get caught in that. So at least you kind of go, you don't want to push the feeling down, but at least you give a chance for a gap. And it takes practice, and it takes, number one, commitment, and it transforms our lives without question. So it is worth doing.